I want to talk about Biden's address he delivered from Independence Hall in Philadelphia last night in prime time. Interesting that it was in prime time, and a lot of the networks chose not to carry it live, but of course there's clips of it everywhere. Just to set it up, White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre was asked about kind of the content of the president's speech before he gave it on Thursday, and she made very clear that it was not going to be a politically oriented speech.
Is tonight a political speech?
No, it's not a political speech. This is an opportunity, again, for the president to directly have a conversation with the American people.
Why don't you listen to parts of President Biden's speech and you tell me whether you think it was political?
Donald Trump and the MAGA Republicans represent an extremism that threatens the very foundations of our republic. America must choose to move forward or to move backwards. MAGA Republicans have made their choice. They embrace anger. They thrive on chaos. Vote, vote, vote.
The bulk of the speech was about rejecting an entire voting base in America, millions of people who support the former president. Yet the White House wanted us to think, and still, by the way, wants us to think, that it wasn't political. Here's the press secretary being asked post-speech about her pre-speech comments that it wasn't going to be political.
The way we see it here, and I would argue the way many Americans across the country see it, is standing up for democracy is not political. Denouncing political violence is not political. Defending rights and freedom is not political. Making clear that the challenges facing the nation is not political. We don't call any of that political. We see that as leadership, and we see that as presidential.
Now, do I support Donald Trump or the MAGA agenda? No, I don't. But am I dumb enough to believe that that speech wasn't political? No, and I'm assuming that you guys aren't either. So why would the White House think Americans are dumb enough to believe that this wasn't a political speech? Now, let's talk about the imagery of the speech before we get a little bit deeper into the content and the takeaways. A lot has been made about the deep red background that was behind Biden, and also the Marines that were standing behind him in shadow. So first, it's important to note that Independence Hall wasn't just lit up in this blood red. It was also deep blue, but a lot of the shots of Biden, face on, you couldn't see the blue on the side, which I think would have made a difference. I don't know if it was strategic for President Biden and his team to want him to stand in front of the deep red hue and make it this brooding, apocalyptic feeling. It was strange. And then as for the Marines standing behind Biden, look, I certainly think it's inappropriate to use members of the armed services in that way. I will note that Republican presidents have done the same thing. There are photos of President Trump with Marines standing behind him, giving official remarks. So it's certainly been done before. This was a little strange because they're in shadow, and it almost seemed like they were part of the set. Like it was very intentional to have them draped in shadow in that way. So anyway, yeah, the imagery was weird, but I gotta say, the optics of it are the least of my concern. It is the content of what the president said that is most concerning.
MAGA Republicans have made their choice. They embrace anger. They thrive on chaos. They live not in the light of truth, but in the shadow of lies.
I agree with a lot of what the president had to say about the dangers of folks who deny elections. You've had some of these quote unquote MAGA candidates, people who are backed by former President Donald Trump, who don't believe that he lost the 2020 election, who cry voter fraud. You look at Kari Lake in Arizona, the gubernatorial candidate. When she was behind on primary election night, she was already talking about, fraud and wanting to do an audit. And then when she ended up winning, all of a sudden there wasn't this concern about voter fraud influencing the outcome of the election. And so I think a lot of that is just frankly bullshit. And it is dangerous. And I am concerned. I don't want President Trump to be president again. But to think that, follow me on this one, because I'm trying to stuff my emotions in on this because it really pisses me off. The media made Donald Trump. The media made Donald Trump's presidency happen. They carried every single event he did, all the remarks he did, wall to wall, live coverage during the 2016 presidential election. Every crazy remark he said was in headlines all over the country. CNN, MSNBC focused on it nonstop. They gave him enough attention to take what was a dead-on-arrival campaign and make Donald Trump the president of the United States. Their hatred for him during all that period made Donald Trump the president of the United States. And after the media made Donald Trump the president of the United States, they spent the next 6 years calling him a threat to the country, a threat to democracy, a dangerous man, painting him as the worst thing that has ever happened to the country. Completely lacking self-awareness that they were the ones that put him in that position to begin with. And now you fast forward and you have Joe Biden in this primetime address talking about the existential threat that MAGA Republicans present to our country. Yet the speech comes just after a primary election where the campaign arm of the Democratic Party for Congress, the DCCC, spent donor funds to prop up the very candidates that Joe Biden spent more than 20 minutes last night warning the country about. I have a big problem with that. You don't get to, as a Democratic Party, spend money propping up these candidates, playing Russian roulette. You say they're an existential threat to democracy. You pour money into their campaigns so they can beat more mainstream Republicans because you think the MAGA Republicans will be easier to beat in November. But all of this is starting to seem like part of a larger plan. For Democrats to spend donor money, sending MAGA candidates forward to the November election, only for Joe Biden to now, in the last couple months, and in a very big public way last night, paint those exact candidates as a threat to the country, as a threat that must be extinguished. And I can't help but wonder whether those two things are both part of the same plan for Democrats to keep control in November, in an election year where we all expected them to lose overwhelmingly due to the state of the country. I will say Democrats are doing a pretty damn good job of keeping the attention, keeping the focus, keeping the conversation on Trump, on MAGA Republicans, keeping the conversation away from the crisis at the border, the economy, the crime crisis in the country, rising costs, rising gas prices. If this is a strategy, it is turning out to be a pretty effective strategy for Democrats. But it is also incredibly hypocritical, just like the media. Raising alarm bells about Donald Trump for 6 years after putting him in the White House. No self-awareness, no self-reflection. And then the standard bearer of the Democratic Party getting up in front of the blood-red background, warning Americans about MAGA Republicans after his own party propped up MAGA Republicans in August. Shame on them.
Donald Trump and the MAGA Republicans represent an extremism that threatens the very foundations of our republic.
This should be as disgusting to Democrats as it is to Republicans. You can't complain about a monster that you created. What I would like to see is every single Democratic congressional candidate in the country condemn what the DCCC did in the primary elections. And by the way, remember I had Congresswoman Kim Schreier on the show after she won the primary, asking her about that tactic. Here's what she said.
No opinion.
That's not good enough. Every single Democratic current member of Congress and congressional candidate should condemn what the DCCC does. If they want us to believe at all that they are concerned about the threat that quote unquote MAGA Republicans have for this country. Because I have a really hard time treating Biden's words with sincerity until he and every other Democrat condemns what the DCCC did. Like I said, optics of the speech, whatever. You know, the president wants to get up in official remarks, wants to, 2 months before a critical midterm election, wants to vilify the other party. Honestly, that's not surprising. Wants to do it in front of the blood red backdrop, whatever. Wants to do it with Marines behind him, whatever. It is the utter hypocrisy, though, that I can't abide. And frankly, the president should be ashamed of himself. His press secretary should be ashamed of herself for claiming that it wouldn't be political. Brett Baer at Fox, who's very even-keeled, he made a really good point about the speech that Biden gave last night that's worth listening to.
A lot of times when we analyze things, we do things through the prism of how the media would cover it if Donald Trump gave this speech. I think they might not stop talking about it for weeks on end. Because the messaging was so aggressive, it really was also a blueprint for Democratic candidates. This is how we're going to run. This is what you should be talking about. And while he hit tones of optimism about what he thinks about America, he clearly was trying to divide and drive a wedge in the Republican Party. I think they believe, the political advisors to the president, that the more that they're talking about Donald Trump, the more that the country is talking about Donald Trump, the better positioned they are to not be talking about inflation, crime, immigration, etc.
So you know what? Democrats can shout from the rooftops about MAGA Republicans being a threat to the country. But they don't get to do it while simultaneously supporting the very same candidates.